possible for you not to fry in the sun. If some of you who might want to ask a question come a little closer so that I can hear, I'm happy. One of the things I would like to do is answer questions that you may have about this whole issue. That's one of the things I want to do today. I also want to explain, how we all came to be here, because I have, along with Howie and a couple of others here, been in this business for a really long time, and have seen things change. And the situation now, ever since the death of Don Brancho at SeaWorld Orlando, is really different, right? In terms of the energy, in terms of the focus, in terms of the composition of this crowd, all right? It's really, really different. We are now mainstream. Okay? 22 years ago, actually, when I started in this, we were not mainstream. We were on the fringe. And I, as a biologist who entered this advocacy world, found myself marginalized even within my own scientific community, which was a very strange experience because everything I've done, ever since I started in this, has been soundly, in my opinion, based in science. It's what I do, right? It's the role I play in this movement is I try to base our opinions and our views and our ideologies in science, because there's a reason beyond our emotions why this is wrong. These animals are suffering in captivity, and there's evidence and there's data that prove that. Okay, so that's what I bring to this, is that background, that training, and I am trying through, for instance, my Facebook page. Some of you follow my Facebook page. It's From the Dolphin's Point of View, and I call it that because what I want people to do is try to see things from the dolphin's point of view. They don't get to go home at night. Their tank is this little box, and that's where they are 24/7, 365. All right? I think a lot of people, if they really understood that there is no off stage, no behind the scenes, larger enclosure that they get sent to in the evening after the workday is done, if they realize that that doesn't exist, that this is it, then they might have a different opinion. So again, that's what we're here to do, is we're here to open the eyes of the general public to that reality. And again, for 20 years ago, we were shouting in the wilderness. Nobody was listening to us, not the National Marine Fisheries Service, not, well, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the USDA is still not listening to us, but anyway. They weren't listening to us, and so now they have to start listening to us. Now we are mainstream. Now our movement is growing. And it, tragically, that change was because somebody was killed. And it was quite amazing that, 3 people died before that, and it didn't make any difference. Kelty Byrne died in 1991, it didn't make a difference. Daniel Dukes died in 1999, it didn't make a difference. Alexis Martinez died in December of 2009, and that really should have made a difference, and it didn't make a difference. And now, finally, somebody dies at SeaWorld in public view in February of 2010, and suddenly it made all the difference in the world. And I feel very badly about that. I hope everybody does, but sometimes that's what it takes to move a paradigm, to shift a paradigm, is tragedy. And so we get Death at SeaWorld, a book by David Kirby. We get Blackfish, a film by Gabriella Cowperthwaite. We are going to get Beneath the Surface, a book by John Hargrove, in March. And things are changing. More and more people are aware of what's going on. Mainstream, everyday people who don't really have an animal rights bent at all are starting to question the morality of this. And a colleague friend of mine that I won't name, put it this way: look, these are really big animals, and they're interacting with really small people. It's just not safe for them, it's not smart for the animals, it's not safe for the trainers. What is going on here? Why have we been blind to this for 50 years? And I think some people are just finally realizing the emperor is wearing no clothes. So that's what, to me, this is all about. Us educating everybody that, yeah, you know what? The emperor's buck naked. Okay? So what I would like to do is take some questions, and if you have one and you're way in the back, please feel free to come on forward, bake in the sun for 2 minutes to ask a question, and then run back to the shade. All right, I feel bad for you folks. I hope you're all wearing sunscreen. The question is, has anybody actually tried to speak with the management of the Seaquarium, and we can make that question bigger and say of SeaWorld or any of these places. Not just the orca holding places, but the dolphin holding places as well. Has anybody actually tried to speak to the management and the industry? Sit down in a rational way and speak to the industry. Yes. Again, having been around forever and ever and ever, 18 years ago, I was part of a process that the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the USDA started. It was called the negotiated rulemaking, and all of us, one side of the aisle and the other. So I was sitting in the room with Brad Andrews of SeaWorld, and a few other executives of SeaWorld, and the Shed Aquarium, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm sitting in this room that is convened by the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service in an effort to update their regulations. As you might imagine, it was very difficult to come to consensus, and that was the process. We had to come to consensus. So we actually managed, to bite the bullet and compromise on a couple of minor provisions of the regulations, but we couldn't come to consensus on the meat of the matter, which is water quality, tank size. So we couldn't come to consensus on those. That was 18 years ago, and we're still waiting for the USDA to do something about that. They're supposed to publish a rule that proposes changes to their regulations. We're 18 years on, 19 years on now, and they still haven't done it. All right, that's one attempt we made. All right, we have, in 1993 when I started, and I was part of a press conference in Orlando to announce my organization's campaign, SeaWorld invited us to take a behind-the-scenes tour, and they schmoozed us all around the park. And we told them what we thought, and they told us that they didn't believe us. They actually expressed doubt, for example, that males really live with their mothers for their whole life in the wild. They don't really do that, do they? I'm like, I'm sorry, yes they do. That's just a scientific fact. And they were like, oh. So that went nowhere. And then most recently, we were in Miami last year with the Virgin Unite and Virgin Holidays group, who were thinking about ceasing to work with tourism companies that acquired dolphins from the wild or even kept dolphins in captivity. And so all we got out of that was, in the future, Virgin Unite and Virgin Holidays will not work with companies that acquire dolphins and whales from the wild, but not if they're in the process. They grandfathered in any that are in process. So those 18 beluga whales from Russia that Georgia Aquarium wants to import are going to be grandfathered in. So they will continue to work with the Georgia Aquarium, even though they are in the process of trying to acquire whales from the wild. They wouldn't grapple with the issue of, maybe you shouldn't be working with these places at all, even no matter where they get their dolphins and whales from. They wouldn't grapple with that. So we're going to keep working on them, but this is a really slow process. Okay, for everybody who gets frustrated when they're trying to do this stuff, here I am 22 years later and I'm still doing this stuff, so you really have to have some patience. This doesn't happen overnight. So he's asking about the Blue World project, which is SeaWorld's solution to the problem they're facing. Instead of dealing with the paradigm shift they're in the middle of, very typically for a corporation, they're doubling down on their old business model, and they're talking about building larger enclosures for their orcas. At the same time, they're hemorrhaging money on the stock market and claiming that they're going to do $50 million in cost-cutting measures, including letting 300 people go. They're talking about a $100 million per park expansion. Now, I'm no business person, I'm really not. I really don't understand the stock market or anything like that, but that doesn't make any mathematical sense to me. If you're in the red, and you have to cut $50 million from your budget to even remotely satisfy your stockholders, how can you then propose that you're going to spend $100 million on something that you claim isn't even necessary for the welfare of the animals? You're doing it for some aesthetic reason or some, well, we always want to do the best by our animals, and this sounds like a good idea, but they won't admit that they're doing it because of blackfish. They won't admit they're doing it because there is a problem with their orca's welfare. There's no problem with our orca's welfare. No, that's not why we're doing it. So if you're going to do it honestly. Don't lie at the same time you're making some concession to your critics. That's really messed up. It's not consistent, it's not logical. People actually notice it's not logical. We all go, then why are you doing it? Why are you wasting $100 million? That, for example, could go to help save the southern resident killer whales from extinction. It's an incredible waste of money. I'm not saying it wouldn't be minusculely better for the captive orcas to be in bigger tanks, but a bigger box is still a box. The incremental increase in their welfare isn't worth that kind of money wastage when it could be going to something that's actually really worthwhile, which would be an exponential increase in their welfare by building a sea pen, for example, or piling it into the Pacific Northwest and saving the salmon so that the southern residents don't go extinct. I mean, that's what's logical. So the question is about a former trainer named Bridget Pirtle, who is associated with blackfish in some way and now is not. She's actually gone back sort of to the SeaWorld fold, and she basically made some claim about how orcas live longer in captivity than in the wild. And my only response to that as a biologist is she's not a biologist, so she's not qualified to talk to that. The other thing I can say about that is SeaWorld is making that claim right now. I want to see it in the peer-reviewed literature before I even discuss it. It's not true, according to my analyses, so show me the data. As I started out with, that's what I'm all about. Show me the data, and we'll talk. No, it absolutely, the question is, even if it's true that they live longer in captivity, why is that even relevant? Because they still have a problem with their quality of life. Again, looking at it just as a biological matter, at the very least, you shouldn't be killing the animals earlier than they would die in the wild. That's the basic welfare question. If you can't even keep them alive as long as they live in the wild, there is something in captivity that's killing them, so you've got a problem. Let's say you keep them alive as long as they live in the wild. Then you've got an issue of, well, then something's killing them with equal efficiency as what's killing them in the wild, and it can't be the same things. They don't have predators, they don't have food shortages, they don't have whatever else is killing orcas or gorillas in the wild. If they do live longer, then you have to ask, well, are they behaving naturally? Are they breeding naturally? Are they doing things in a natural sort of way? Are they able to perform natural functions? And anybody who's seen Lolita, for example, logging Tilikum, logging for hours, any of these animals motionless for hours, I've never seen that in the wild, and I spent 5 years watching them in the wild. Yeah, but you have to start with the very basic, are you keeping them alive at least as long as, and they are clearly not doing that, no matter what Bridget Pirtle says. So the question is, has anybody, and in this case it would be the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, because this is a trainer safety issue, because this gentleman is aware that Hugo used to be aggressive to his trainers, and maybe even Lolita has been aggressive to people, why hasn't anybody examined that? Well, they have. And in fact, Seaquarium has been cited by OSHA for the same violation that SeaWorld was cited, and that case will move forward. I don't think the Seaquarium's going to sit still for it. I think there will be a court case, and I think the Miami Seaquarium will regret that. So the question is about Keiko, and there's a movie out called Keiko, The Untold Story of the Star of Free Willy, which you can get online, and I do urge you to see it, because it is actually the truth about what happened to Keiko. Whatever you've heard, unless you've gotten it from that source or from the book Freeing Keiko, which was by Kenneth Brower, you haven't heard the true story. Those are the only two sources I direct people to get the actual story of what occurred to Keiko. So anyway, the question was, did I think of that as a success, and what would I consider a success? Keiko was returned to his home waters, and he survived for 5 years in them. He was active, he was engaged, he was energetic, none of which he was when he was in Mexico, and not all of which he was when he was in Oregon. So yes, I consider it a success. He lived longer than most captive orca males. He lived to be about 26 or 27, by which time most orca males in captivity are dead. So I think that it was a success. Just his change from Mexico City, where I saw him, to Iceland, where I saw him, he was a different whale. All right, so if that's all we can hope for with any orca we retire, I think that's a success. If any of them can in fact be reintegrated into their homes, into their family pods, that would be ideal. We didn't know who Keiko's family was. There was no way we could identify them based on genetics because the work hasn't been done in Iceland. There was some effort to do it, and we did get an idea of his population, an idea, not as precise identification. We certainly didn't know who his family was. And so we couldn't reintroduce him to his family. We just didn't have the data. So the question is, right now, are trainers allowed in the water with Lolita? As long as the OSHA citation is pending and they've challenged it, yes. Legally, they are still allowed in the water until it's resolved by the courts. But SeaWorld, if you may recall, did not allow their trainers in the water while the case was in the courts, and it was because they didn't want to take the chance that someone might be injured while they were trying to convince a judge that it was safe. With Lolita, because she's never really, seriously injured anybody, I think the Seaquarium thinks it's a safe gamble, but it's a gamble. So, did you hear Howard Garrett talk? Were you here when Howie was talking? He explained all of that, and I don't want to step on Howie's toes, so I'm not going to repeat all of it. The question was, how is it different with Lolita, since we do know her family? It is going to be a transitional, carefully planned, step-by-step process. It won't be all at once, and she will be cared for by her caretakers until she shows she's ready. She will be trapped. If she is ever released, if she becomes distressed or isn't quite making it, we will be able to retrieve her. These release projects have been done before, and the key is, doing it in steps, letting her set the pace, and then being able to retrieve if she becomes distressed, or he or whoever you're releasing. Okay, so that's how it's done. But talk to Howie. No, that's a good question. The question is, morally, just from Lolita's perspective, she should be released because she is in a box and she shouldn't be in a box. But her population is endangered. Her family is endangered. The habitat where she would be returned is damaged. So morally, what would I say about the plan to return her to that? Well, the whole point is keeping her in that box isn't helping anybody. She can actually, I think, energize her family, if that's what happens. If it doesn't happen, then I still think she's going to be better off in an enclosure, in a sea pen, not threatened by the lack of salmon out there, because she would still be cared for. We're not going to be risking her life once she's in Puget Sound. If she gets released if she is able to be reintegrated into her family and is released, that's her choice, and she's actually probably going to be able to, she's 48, 49 years old, I think she's going to be able to manage. It's the young ones that are most in trouble. I mean, Rhapsody notwithstanding, that was a young female who was pregnant who died recently. She was pregnant, and she was very young and inexperienced. She was only 18, and so I think it's not Granny. Granny's still around. She's over 100 years old, It's not the older animals that are going to be at most at risk. It's the young animals who aren't able to cope. So I think her life, once she's in Puget Sound, is going to be protected by either her caretakers or her family. But keeping her at Seaquarium is not an option. It's just not the right decision. No, I know, but I think it was a really good question. I think it's a really good question. The question is, if she is in fact legally, given up by the aquarium and is moved, will she go to Puget Sound for sure? And yes, if she leaves captivity and is retired to a sea pen, that sea pen is going to be in Washington State. It isn't built yet, but we know we have a location. Again, I don't know. I'm not the one to ask about the details. You need to ask Howie. Okay? So the question is about if, in fact, we are successful and we manage to, beat SeaWorld back, and in fact there's a significant legal request to end this public display of these animals. For instance, the bill in California passes, it becomes illegal in California to publicly display these animals. If that happens, how will we stop them from just shipping them all to China or the Middle East or someplace else? And that is a very good question. In the interim between any law passing and any law being implemented, there is a possibility that they'll stick some whales on a plane and send them out of the country, and it would be very difficult for us to stop that legally. Our law on exports is very weak. All right? However, with SeaWorld only owning most of the orcas in captivity in the United States, my feeling is if it becomes illegal to publicly display these animals and there's a mandate to retire them to sea pens, if we reach that point, if they then take any window that they have before the law becomes the law of the land and export them, they're going to look so bad that any chance they have of surviving as a corporation and running those sea pens as a profit-making venture, which I have no objection to, they want to keep charging people money to see these animals in retirement, let them. I'm not interested in shutting SeaWorld down. I don't care about SeaWorld. I care about these whales. What I'm trying to say is I think they would be extremely foolish to do it. That doesn't mean they won't. They've been foolish before. But I'm just saying that you should, for instance, if we get to that point, I think a bunch of letters to SeaWorld saying, you better not send them to China. We're watching you. That'll look like an end run around the law. And, you're going to lose, you're going to hemorrhage money. Even SeaWorld supporters would be very upset if Shamu went to China. They love Shamu. They don't want Shamu to go to China. So the question is about Keiko, that's how it's pronounced, about comparing Keiko to Lolita and that comparison and how do I feel about it. It is apples and oranges. They are two different whales. Every single one of these animals is a unique individual, and so comparing one to the other is a little bit of an apples and oranges exercise no matter what. But in this particular case, it is very much an apples and oranges exercise because we know Lolita's family. We know where she is from. We know the date she was captured. We knew none of those data for Keiko. What is the possibility of closing the loophole that allows them to export whales and dolphins with it, so easily? There has been some interest expressed by the federal government. This would be Congress. This would be legislators in the Congress on addressing the weaknesses in the Marine Mammal Protection Act related to captivity. There's been some interest expressed. But as most of you must know, and Sam is from the Bahamas, so she may not know this, we have a really bad Congress right now. We have a really conservative, business-friendly, anti-environmental Congress right now. So even though there's been some interest expressed, I'm not sure it's a good environment for trying to push that forward. In fact, if we reopened the MMPA to amendment, we might find ourselves facing even worse amendments. There's always that risk if you open it up for amendments that bad ones would get in as well as, or instead of good ones. So my feeling right now is the political climate in our Congress is not conducive to good changes to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I'm sorry, it's the reality I live with every bloody day. Somebody had their hand up. Yes?
I don't understand the Animal Welfare Act.
Nobody understands the Animal Welfare Act. Okay, that's good, and I'm happy to do this, but, you know, if you want to know what it's like to go down the rabbit hole with Alice, I will show you how it is to go down the rabbit hole with Alice, all right? The law on this point is very clear. There are regulations that the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service has promulgated to implement the law, the Animal Welfare Act. The minimum horizontal dimension, there's only one minimum and there's only one maximum. Anybody who's been in math class knows that is true. So the minimum horizontal dimension has to be twice the average length of an orca, which in this case, according to them, is 24 feet, that's the average length, and therefore 48 feet. When you say minimum horizontal dimension, by definition, that is the minimum distance in her enclosure that she can swim from one wall to the other at a 90-degree angle. So the narrowest part of her enclosure, however it is shaped, whether it is kidney-shaped or oval-shaped or circular or square or rectangular, the minimum horizontal dimension, right angled, wall to wall, has to be 48 feet. Lolita's tank is an oval, and the long axis is 80 feet. The short axis is to the island in the middle of her tank because that is a solid concrete barrier that goes down to the bottom. Last I looked, orcas are fabulous animals, but they can't swim through concrete. So she cannot go from one wall to the far wall, which is 60 feet away. She's not a crow. That is as the crow flies. She can swim around the circumference of her tank when the gates are open to get to the far side, but the law doesn't say minimum circumference. It says minimum horizontal dimension. APHIS will tell you, if you ask them about this, that there are apparently two minimum horizontal dimensions in Lolita's tank. One is 60 feet, which isn't true, and one is 80 feet. Well, that's just nonsensical. And then they say the island does not prevent Lolita from swimming to the far side, which is also, of course, in one weird way true. If the gates are open, she can swim around it, but that's not what the law says. The law says she has to be able to swim in a straight line, not a curved line. So it's illegal. Now, the problem is getting standing under the Animal Welfare Act to sue in court to make them enforce the law. Getting standing on behalf of an animal is extremely difficult under the AWA. Given that it protects animals, that's kind of unfortunate, but it was passed in 1966 when nobody thought about these things. So, we've never been able to sue on this point, successfully anyway. There's been a couple of suits, but they've not been successful. So, the key here, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, but I do work in policy, is if she's protected under the Endangered Species Act, and NOAA says they must keep her in an AWA compliant facility to not take her, which would be a violation of the ESA. We will then go to the courts under the ESA, where we do have the right to sue, and say that tank is not AWA compliant. APHIS has been saying it is for 40 years, but they're wrong. They've been breaking the law. And if you agree with them, NOAA, you will be breaking the law. So it's going to be a bit of a process, but the ESA listing will finally give us the right, the legal right, to sue on behalf of Lolita. But APHIS is just nuts, so they just make up things and wave their hands around and take you down the rabbit hole. That's the only answer I have for that. The agency that recently fined the Miami Seaquarium was OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, for allowing their trainers to swim in the water with an orca, which they've already determined is not safe. So the lawsuit, if there is one, will be from Miami Seaquarium to overturn that citation, because they think it's safe to swim with Lolita. And so the court case will be OSHA against the Miami Seaquarium, and OSHA will actually be the party being sued to overturn the citation they issued. The question is, how can they continue swimming with Lolita during the lawsuit? It's because the citation will not take effect until the courts decide whether it should take effect. How do I feel about NOAA? Wow, what a great question. Well, Okay, and this is just something I'd like to offer to all of you. Fair enough. The people who work at government agencies are people. Agencies, bureaucracies are made up of human beings. I actually know a lot of those human beings. It's my job to talk to them on a somewhat daily basis, a weekly basis anyway, to try to make sure that all the laws that I'm interested in, the animal laws, are being enforced properly or implemented properly or interpreted properly. So I'm, for example, meeting with a NOAA administrator, sometime in the next 2 weeks. We just had to postpone the meeting, but we'll reschedule it. So they're human beings, and I like some of them. I'd have a beer with some of them. But all they can do is enforce the law, and sometimes the law sucks. And sometimes they suck. I mean, sometimes these people are not very nice people, and I don't like them. But it's not because of them working for NOAA. It's because I don't like them. I think that on the whole, our government has better laws to work with than most other jurisdictions. Most other countries don't have a Marine Mammal Protection Act. They don't even have an Animal Welfare Act. As crappy as the Animal Welfare Act is in this country, it exists. It doesn't even exist in a lot of countries. So I play the hand I'm dealt. I'm a realist. And, I can sit around and just say, I hate NOAA, but that's not very realistic. I don't hate any agency. It's just a bureaucracy. I don't hate agencies. I don't hate people either. I just like some intensely, but I don't hate them. That's a real waste of energy. It's a real waste of energy that we can't afford when animals need our help. So I instead choose to, fight to make sure that there are strong laws and that those strong laws are enforced and that people are educated and make wise consumer choices and so on and so forth. Those are the things I waste my energy on. I don't waste my time hating people or bureaucracies or things. There's just no. I don't hate the Miami Seaquarium. What is the Miami Seaquarium? I intensely dislike Arthur and Andrew Hertz, but I don't hate Miami Seaquarium. It's just a thing. There's no point hating it. What happened to Tilikum in the aftermath of death at SeaWorld? Absolutely nothing. He's still swimming around in a circle. He's logging day after day. He occasionally performs as the big splash at the end of the show. He spends a lot of time just staring at the other whales. It's just, he's not entirely alone. They usually put in a young male with him. They vary which young male it is, so he's not alone anymore, but he's 34 now, 35, which is really pushing the envelope for a captive male whale. And he's bored. Really, really bored. Possibly, disturbed bored. Oh, you mean did they euthanize him because he killed somebody? No, he's killed 3 people and they've never euthanized him. No, it's not his fault. They put people in this stupid proximity to the top marine predator in the ocean. Every trainer who's been delusional enough to get in the water with these animals in a box where they can't escape, again, I don't hate these people. I think they're foolish because they were deluded by a company that told them it was safe. Do I think he'll be released? How many of you are parents? Would you want Tilikum swimming out in the ocean free and wild when your kid was on a boat or at a dock or anything? I would think not. He's killed 3 people. I would not want my child, I don't have one, I'm sorry to say, but I wouldn't want my child to be out on the water when Tilikum was swimming around. I'm sorry, I wouldn't. I think that's foolish. I'm a realist. And that whale is not normal. It's not his fault, but he's not normal. What I want for Tilikum is retirement. I want him to be in a large sea pen with an animal, another orca that he likes. I want him to be with a compatible companion where he can just live out his days, interacting with the animals he likes, dealing with trainers he likes in a safe way where they don't put themselves in harm's way. Fat and happy. That's what I want for Tilikum, or fat and, not in a box. You go, sorry, can you go to something else? How many whales are in captivity? Yes, I can give you the whole rundown if you want. There's 55 killer whales, orcas in captivity around the world. Several of them are in Russia, several of them are in Japan, Several of them are in France. One is in Argentina. One is in Canada. There's 23 in the United States, 24 with Lolita in the United States, and there are several in Spain. Okay? And it all comes out to 55. There are a few, the question is, what do I think about rescue, rehab, release facilities that exploit their animals? And I bet you dollars to donuts you're talking about Clearwater Marine Aquarium. I am trying to work with such facilities to ensure they are not exploiting their animals. I do think there is an issue with a hospital versus a permanent facility for animals that can't be released. Certain facilities, I'm not going to name them, certain facilities were never meant to be permanent facilities. They were meant to be rescue and rehab facilities, and therefore what we need to do is deal with the animals that cannot be released need a facility that is better than what they currently have. Exactly. So what I want to see is no exploitation for commercial purposes. I do think the animals need to be stimulated on a daily basis. I would like to see that done with less commercial crassness, and so we're working on those things. I am working on those things, so I'm very aware of that facility, so I know what you're talking about. How close are we to having Lolita freed? Well, again, if you heard, is it going to happen in our lifetime? It had better, because that's her lifetime. She can live a lot longer, but you know, they live as long as we do. She's my age. Okay, I'm 52, well she's about 50, so in my lifetime it better be, because it's her lifetime. Any other questions from somebody who has already asked? I am a professional marine biologist. I have a PhD in biology. I studied orcas in the wild for my PhD, so, you know, not only do I know a lot about marine mammals, but I know a lot about orcas. Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy to turn any young person into a marine biologist. I'm really sorry. I work for the Animal Welfare Institute, which is a nonprofit in Washington, and we don't have a volunteer crew. We have interns, but no volunteers. You need to discuss that with local organizations that are at the grassroots level that need volunteers and work with volunteers. You know, that's what they mostly do, is work with volunteers, because they have very small budgets and can't pay. So that's how you, I'm not the person to ask, but there are a lot of them here in Florida, and I think you can identify one that can use your help. Yes. The question is about stranded animals when they are deemed non-releasable and they go to a commercial, you know, aquarium, and then they end up performing. Unfortunately, once NOAA determines they are not releasable, they are transitioned to become public display animals. That's just the way the law is. One of the things we want to do is offer an alternative. If we end up with an animal that goes to a stranding center and is determined to be non-releasable after it recovers, because it was too young, because it has an injury like no tail, you know, because it just can't be released, then we would like to have an alternative for that animal other than going to a commercial public display facility to be a performer. We would like to have a sanctuary. That's what we're working toward, is to have sanctuaries. And again, I'm working on that. I haven't gotten it there yet. And it's not just me. There's a whole coalition of nonprofit organizations that are working on trying to establish sanctuaries for whales and dolphins. And we're making progress, but it's very slow. It's very expensive to keep these animals for life. It's not just money, but that's a big part of it. Thank you very much. It's 1 o'clock. It's my time. So if you do have any other questions, I'm wandering around.